Hi folks, James here, and welcome to the Spiro Circle. I'd like to address by first pointing out that my throat is not feeling very good today. Any parents of young children will know that when you send your infant to nursery, the whole house gets sick for a week. So I'd just like to start by saying I'm sorry if I sound a bit croaky. But the episode you're about to listen to today was recorded about a week and a half ago with founder and CEO of Foodini, Dylan McDonnell. So Dylan started his career as a corporate lawyer, but quickly had a career shift when he realized there was a whole business in America and Canada and Australia for restaurants that need to list allergies on their menus. His company uses AI to identify all of the different allergies in a menu or in ingredients to help the 33 million Americans who suffer from some form of dietary restriction. The interview also came at an interesting time. California had just signed into law a policy that requires restaurants or food establishments of more than 20 locations to list all 9 food allergies on their menus. Now, if you're listening to this from the EU, you're probably wondering, well, what's the big deal? All menus have allergies listed on their menus. That's actually not the case for the US. There's no nationwide mandate requiring those to do that. So we spoke about how Foodini helped lobby the California government. We discussed the tech that's helping save lives. And we're talking about what it means to quit a corporate job and jump into the deep end to chase an entrepreneurial dream. I hope you enjoy. Dylan, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Not at all, James. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You had somewhat of a career pivot, right? So before starting Foodini, you had a whole law career behind you, which you dropped to start what you're doing now. Talk me through a bit about that process and what inspired you to make that jump.
Sure. Yeah. So my background, just for context, you probably hear an Irish accent. I'm a bit of a funny one. I was born in Philly, grew up in Ireland, Irish parents. And yeah, I was a corporate lawyer by trade. So I worked in a kind of big law in Dublin. Initially, worked with a lot of the kind of global tech companies and ended up moving into and specializing in investment funds. So did that in Dublin for a few years, and that journey took me to Australia, where I went in-house with actually one of our clients that in my initial law firm. So worked in and on the investment funds team in Sydney for a few years, and yeah, it wasn't a planned pivot. Let's put it that way. I hadn't envisaged moving in the direction I had, but long story short, I'm also celiac, so diagnosed when I was 10, which for anyone listening who doesn't know what that is, essentially means gluten free. So I have to avoid gluten. And I'd been sick for a few years before they kind of figured out what was wrong with me. And then once they did, and I went on the gluten free diet, I've been largely perfect ever since. But the challenge really over the course of time was around dining out. So anytime going out to eat with friends or family or coworkers or whatever, there was just a complete lack of transparency and visibility into what was in food. And that became very challenging in terms of the amount of times I was given the wrong food, misinformation from staff. You're getting the dreaded, I think this is gluten free, and you're like, I know you don't know, and that's nearly the biggest risk. And you think you live on your own island where this is you're the only person that this is impacting. But when I actually started digging into the numbers, it was kind of mind blowing. So like taking the US as which is our primary market now, as an example, 33 million Americans have a diagnosed food allergy. It's about 1 in 10. Then you have another 50 million Americans that have a food intolerance, which is a food disagrees with them, but it's not a technical medical allergy as yet. And then you have another 70 million Americans that follow some form of lifestyle diet. So from vegan, vegetarian, keto, low FODMAP, paleo, low carb, you name it. And so I just couldn't wrap my head around how are there so many people who need to understand what is in their food to make an informed dining decision, and yet a complete lack of visibility as to what is in the food itself. And we can talk, and I'm sure we will in a few minutes, around the different kind of maybe regulation and legislative requirements in different countries and how that impacts this. But once
And
I
different
realized the
states,
TAM,
I guess, as well, right?
yes, and in different states here. But once I realized the TAM was that big, once I had investigated and seen that there was no solution out there, comprehensive, I just saw an opportunity to take a crack off it, and thankfully it's been going well so far.
Fantastic. I love those stories. I love when you hear from founders themselves and you hear the personal journey that took them from one life to another. Talk to me a bit about the product Foodini itself. So you're out there helping those with dietary restrictions or self-imposed or health or otherwise for eating out. Talk me through the tech and the product itself for those who may not be
Sure.
familiar.
Just for context, the reason why this didn't exist previously is because the data doesn't exist. And what I mean by that is the data layer around food allergies and dietary needs, because restaurants have not typically documented or tagged this or stored it in any database. There's not just some API that you can use to pull this data from a data source. So we're building out that data set to be able to power this. And so in essence, what we do really is we work with restaurants, hotels, stadiums, schools, universities, online ordering. Really, we can work with anyone who serves food, full stop. We pull their menu data, we pull their recipe and inventory data, and their product data, and we've built a system, AI based, trained large language models on all this data, which enables us to ingest that data, analyze it, tag it with the correct allergen and dietary information, and then we can leverage that to create a personalized menu experience for consumers based on their dietary needs. So on the consumer side, a consumer via QR code on a menu or a button on the restaurant's website can scan allergy menu, scan QR, web app pops up, create dietary profile from 150 different options. So gluten, dairy, tomato, save, and instantly we customize the menu to them. Here's what you can eat. Here's what you can eat with a modifier and what that modifier is. And here's what you can't eat and why, because it contains these ingredients that are baked in. So it's a completely personalized experience for the consumer. And on the restaurant side, we both gather and analyze the data for them, but also publish it to the consumer and make sure it's kept up to date.
Wow, it's so interesting, and I mean, not to sound dramatic, but it could save lives, right? Because you never know when someone says, does this food have so and so, and you're right, what you alluded to. The waiter on their first day may not know, or may just say yes or say no. It reminds me of a tech that I saw in hospital once when the nurse came in to help the patient order dinner, and they said, based on your current medication that you're taking and the stage in your treatment, I'm only allowed to order certain items on the menu, because it was on an iPad. So only some items would ping up. So it kind of reminds me of that, although that's probably just a completely different use case entirely. Tell me, who are your customers right now? I guess your customers are the food enterprises. So can you share with us some of those people?
Yeah, of course. So, for context as well, actually, I should have mentioned I've been very fortunate. When we talked about the founder story, my co-founder Erica Anderman has been in restaurant world, tech world for about 15 years over here as well. She helped build the initial schema that powers menu data on the internet still today, and for the most part, and has run go to market for a number of other big food tech companies here. So. Was definitely very fortunate as we moved into the US market to have someone in market who already had a lot of the connections that we needed to kind of go where we need to go in a lot of the food enterprises. So yeah, James, to your point, we work with a number of like mid-market groups, like, call it 20 plus locations is what we're primarily focused on. There's a reason for that, which I'll give you in a moment. But really, like, what we see anywhere that we work, whether it's an SMB, mid-market, hotel, stadium, you name it, the benefits for the organization go from, we see about a 60% reduction in the number of questions being asked, because now you've put the information in front of the consumer with a
That's a
digital tool.
huge relief, I'm sure.
Exactly. That now, as you said, that new member of staff who started yesterday doesn't have to be an expert on every allergen and every menu item, which probably wasn't even documented in the first place, and they didn't even have the ability to be an expert if they wanted to be. So a big reduction in questions, as a result, a big reduction in mistakes, which obviously for a restaurant can potentially, put you out of business if you one slip up on one day. Both brand and legal is a big risk there. We are also seeing from a revenue standpoint, right? If the consumer with a food allergy doesn't understand that you can cater to them, they're not going to go. It's as simple as that. And if you lose them, you don't just lose them. You lose their family, their friends, their co-workers, everyone that they normally dine out with. So we call that the veto vote. So by actually documenting and displaying this information to consumers and allowing them to understand what they can eat, you attract the most loyal consumer base that exists in the world of eating out, which is those who have food allergies, because they find it so hard to find places that can cater for them. Once they do, they keep going back. And then there's the data as well, James. So we can tell restaurants last month in X location, you had 1,000 people create a dietary profile. 40% were gluten-free, 25% were vegan, 10% were keto. You don't have any keto options on your menu. Here's how we recommend you optimize your menu to also cater to that group. Here's how you also now can market to consumers because you understand their dietary profiles and hit them on World Gluten-Free Day or World Vegan Day or whatever it might be. So yeah, the benefits and the lift for restaurants are significant just by doing what they should be doing anyway, which is documenting allergens and displaying it to consumers.
You mentioned the data that these places are collecting, which is a huge help for them, I'm sure, and shows your value, right, to them. What are some of the concerns around the privacy of that data? Are there any, and does it differ from state to state or country to country? Talk me through a bit about that process on your end.
Yeah, on the US side, for our web app solution that's in restaurants, we don't collect any personal data. So it's scan QR, it's create dietary profile, but we don't ask for a name or an email address or any personal identifiable data. Consumers do have the ability to save a profile and to have that apply in other restaurants that use our technology. But that obviously, we comply with all the privacy laws depending on the region. We're only really operational currently in Australia, the US, and Canada. So like the European stuff isn't really in scope for us as yet. Although,
why is that? Is there a reason behind that?
It's just scale. We're a startup. We've raised a few rounds of capital, but it's hard to do the whole world at once. So we're trying to focus on the markets that we think it makes most sense for us in. The other point actually and there's another reason there. So when we talk about legislation, Europe has legislation on food allergies. So any of your European listeners, and say someone in Ireland right now will be listening to this saying, but restaurants that I go to do have the 14, as it is in Ireland and Europe, major food allergens labeled on menus. So a lot of European countries do this because they're required to. So you can't, open a restaurant in Ireland without labeling for the 14 major food allergens on the menu. And they typically do that manually. Like there's like a grid is what we typically see on the bottom of the menu where it's like 1 gluten, 2 eggs, 3 wheat, 4 nuts, and then every menu item beside it will
it's like a key, right, at the bottom.
A key, exactly. So again, Europe is way ahead of the US and Canada, and even Australia. Australia, you're required to document it, but not necessarily put it on the menu. The US has had no legislation, 0 requirements, full stop for restaurants to do anything around food allergies. What they do have is requirements around consumer packaged goods, and a number of years ago, they also introduced requirements around nutrition. So you had to, if you had 20 plus locations, you had to label for calories.
Yeah, I see the calorie ones. That's a massive pain, to be honest, when you walk into your favorite food place and you see how many calories are there.
I know, but I suppose they're trying to make sure before you put that double cheeseburger into you from that you understand.
Yeah, I've got to have just the single cheeseburgers instead.
Exactly. But and good news for, I suppose, Foodini, and good news I would argue for the American people. On the 13th of October, so 2 weeks ago, Gavin Newsom signed in California the first bill that relates to food allergies in restaurants in the United States. And that was an onerous process. I was working with the Senator's team and the other co-sponsors here on the ground to make sure this got over the line. And there was a lot of hoops to jump through. But in essence, what this now means is that any restaurant group in the country that has 20 plus locations, where one is in California, is caught by this requirement. And effective
And
1
sorry,
July
and that
20.
applies to all 20 of them, even if just one is in California. It goes across the
No,
country.
no, it won't. It'll apply to the locations in California. But what we're hearing, and as we talk to these groups, they're like, well, if we're going to have to go to the hassle of doing this for California, it's the same data in our other locations. So it sounds like for the most part they're going to, and it's because it's mainly mid market and enterprise chains. It sounds like for the most part they're going to display the same data across the country. But effective 1 July, they must label all of their menus for the major nine, as it is in the US, food allergens. And so,
And can you just name those nine? I think you did earlier, but just for the record.
yeah, it's eggs, dairy, wheat, sesame, shellfish, fish, tree nuts, peanuts. Did I say sesame?
You did, yeah.
I
This
might have
isn't a
missed one.
test. I was
Yeah,
just
yeah,
curious.
yeah.
It's not like I have them here.
It felt like a test, James. No,
Sorry, that's the journalist in me where I'm like, oh, name it.
Yeah. No, I'm missing one in there. There's nine here anyway.
We can put them up. You can. I'll put them up on the screen so we can see them.
All good. It's nine here, 12 in Canada, 14 in Europe. So it does differ depending on the region. But that's a big step change over here for all these restaurant groups who typically haven't had to document this information at all, not a mind put it on their menus. And so for us, it essentially has made us compliance software, over the last fortnight, because there's two ways restaurants can comply with this regulation. One, they can label every menu, probably in a similar way to they do in Europe, with either a key or a contains XYZ beside every single menu item. Or two, they can link out via QR code to a separate digital allergen menu. And that's what we do. And nearly every restaurant group we've talked to here has a strong preference not to meddle with the design and the makeup of their menu, or not have to keep reprinting menu boards as well, all that. Like when recipes change, they have a strong preference to have a separate experience that manages the allergen information. And so for us, that's very good news, obviously. And so we're working hard now to establish ourselves as the known compliance provider for all these groups who now have to provide this information.
No, that's great. Thank you. It's super interesting to see how these things work and to hear you saying you were working with policymakers on the ground in California. California is one of those states where it's kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, but among Americans seen as the kind of over-regulator, but in some ways it just follows Europe. So this is one example of that. Another example is famously GDPR in Europe, and then it was followed by the CCPA in California, and then once it penetrates America in one state, it drips down to all the other states. So I wouldn't be surprised if California is just the first state to put in these kinds of regulations, especially if it applies to that, what you were saying, those 20 plus locations, which are going to lead
Exactly.
to,
I think that's an extremely well articulated point. I think you've hit the nail on the head. It is. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of business owners in California who rightfully are like, why is it so hard to do business here? Like they make it tough, in particular compared to the rest of the U.S. states, which are largely unregulated in a lot of ways in comparison to Europe or California. But you're 100% correct. Already New York has a bill going through, which is in the same process, which is actually a lot more onerous, covers all restaurants, not just 20 plus. The senator in California has already committed to also go back and make this apply to all restaurants, not just 20 plus, because again, it's every bit as pertinent in the local cafe as it is in Chipotle, right? And then there's a lot of stuff happening at federal level over here as well. We won't talk about politics and whether people agree or disagree with different administrations, but one thing MAHA are doing and focused on is, the ingredients that are in food and trying to remove some of the harmful food dyes. Seed oils has become a big topic for them. The White House, for the first time about a month ago, announced food allergies as a priority health issue for them, which had never been the case before. So we see this kind of piece in California that's just happened as just the first domino in essentially getting to where Europe is, which is this being mandated across the country that you must document the ingredients in your food to ensure that you create a safe space for any consumer that comes into your establishment.
Wow, yeah, it's so interesting that you mention from the state level all the way up to the federal level, because it leads me to my next point, which was asking about the receptiveness of these policy efforts that you do. So politics is famously slow, and it's famously archaic in its the people who are elected and the pace in which change occurs, compared to the quickness of and nimbleness of tech. So you mentioned MAHA as like kind of I imagine the big umbrella in terms of the big media messaging of the whole thing, and the trend, which is great. I mean, it's always nice to be healthier. But what impact are you seeing on the ground when it comes to working with these politicians to get that over the finish line, as you said? Like, is that an easy thing to do, or is it a difficult thing? Talk to me a bit about your role there, and how I imagine health is probably an easier topic to help lobby than something like cyber or surveillance, or like these other
Yeah.
tech startups.
It's a very interesting question, and I would say I'm still learning a lot, right? The American political system, compared to a lot of others, is very political. And California is very political in particular as well. And so up until the 11th hour, the bill that just passed in California was intended to apply to all restaurants. That was the intention, all the way through. And at the 11th hour, there was some back and forth between the governor's office and assembly members. And, it was essentially said, listen, if it's 20 plus, this will get over the line. If it's not, if it's all, we could still have some road bumps here and I get it, like there's special interest groups here that represent the different groups, right? And if you're looking out for restaurants' best interests, this is another job that restaurants have to do. That for some restaurants, it sounds onerous. It's, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Is this going to cost me money? How am I going to keep this up to date? Da da da. Like, a lot of people aren't aware that there are tech solutions like us that'll make it easy for them. Like, that's and not everyone can use us either. There's a lot of people who try and do it themselves, and so these groups that represent restaurants are rightly, from the perspective of the organizations they have interest in, pushing back on this, and they're lobbying the other side, saying it's unsafe to do it because we can't get it perfect, and how are mom and pop shops going to do this, and we're barely keeping the restaurant industry open, and you've already raised the wages on us, and there's all these supplies are so much more expensive, all these things that have hit our industry, and now you're trying to add something else to us. So that's what the other side is saying, which I completely get and have massive empathy for. And then you have the other side, which is saying people are dying because you're not documenting what's in food. And there's 33 million Americans that have this problem. It's not 100,000. So it was very interesting to watch the process play out and watch the different sides fight their battle. And ultimately, I think the compromise is what got it over the line. And yeah, it's interesting how things are received differently by different politics. Even I was trying to ring up assembly members and senators, because that was part of the process as well, to like figure out what way they were going to vote and try and convince them. And just some people just simply didn't care at all. They were like, nah, like, I don't see this. It's not that big a problem, whatever, like restaurants out there. And then the others were extremely sympathetic. So point being, America's very divisive. We know that from the politics that we see on the television play out every night. And I see it trickle down into things like this, which is a shame. But I think in this instance, they came to probably a sensible compromise in terms of it was, it passed the Senate 66-1, which is, wow. Passed the Assembly 66-1. It passed the Senate 32-0. So it was bipartisan support in the end, which is why I suppose what made it easy for the governor to decide to sign. But it's crazy over here, James. It's not like Europe or other places where there is very much more, straightforward systems to get the right thing passed. It's 100% political.
No, I definitely, if it's as crazy over there as I read about from here, I can only imagine how chaotic it must be. But one of the words you used twice in your answer just now was the word compromise, which is not a word you often hear in politics, especially American politics. Especially when it's kind of all but confirmed that the governor of that state is probably going to run for president in the next cycle. I mean, nothing's been confirmed yet, but he's kind of making moves to position himself on a federal level. So I'm sure he's trying to play it safe in everything that he does. Do you enjoy that then? Do you enjoy that kind of political chase? You said you were making the phone calls and getting the signatures. Is that fun for you? I mean, that's probably your legal background, right?
Yeah, no, definitely the legal background plays into it, absolutely, because there was obviously iterations of the legislation as well, and I was trying to work with FAIR, who I have a relationship with over here, and I chair a board for them. I was trying to work with them as well as, a few other co-sponsors to review the language and also make sure it made sense from a boots on the ground standpoint, implementation wise. Do I enjoy it? I think I looked at it from the perspective of this is really good for our business as well. Like, it's the right thing to do anyway. Europe already does it. The senator actually brought forward the suggestion after going on holiday to Ireland and seeing how it was implemented there, and that's what inspired her to come back and push for this. So, like, there is no question in my mind that this was the right thing to do. Obviously, then it's extremely good for our business when this passes. So it was, I think, a very good use of my time to spend a few months focused in and honing in on making sure that this got to where it needed to get to. And I certainly enjoyed it when it passed. I cracked open a bottle of wine that night 2 weeks ago.
I'm sure.
But it was quite tedious as well. There was a lot of hoops to jump through, and a lot of to actually get to the people who needed to talk to was tricky and time consuming. But I'm to your point. As from a legal background, probably less daunting for me than it might be for someone else.
100%. I also want to touch on, because I don't want to put a downer on this conversation, but we were talking about compromise and the politics and how many chains of a restaurant or establishment. It was kind of reminiscent to me of the COVID era, when there were all of these policies in place where it was like, if you're a restaurant and you're this big or you have this establishment, XYZ, you can twist your way into opening or hosting people or whatever. The eat-in industry, the dining industry, took a big hit during COVID because it obviously, during the peak of it, stopped everyone from dining out. But it also kind of shifted the culture a bit. I mean, people kind of didn't, at least what I felt, is that people didn't rush back. What are you finding as a company in that dining space? I mean, do you have trends to see how people are returning to restaurants or establishments like that? And then also with the rise of delivery services as well, which also played a big part in the pandemic and haven't disappeared.
100%. Well, the good is that the regulation applies to all physical and digital menus, right? So ultimately, the restaurant is responsible for the information, but the online ordering providers still need to display it. And you're 100% right. Look at just the earnings that Uber Eats and DoorDash have 70% market share over here, and then Uber Eats 20%, Grubhub 10%. So they're the three biggest players here. And look at DoorDash and Uber Eats' recent earnings; like, they're killing it. Like, there is no doubt that online ordering, and in particular third-party online ordering, is booming and will continue to boom. The hospitality industry, absolutely, like everywhere in the world, took a massive hit here. We're seeing it coming back. It's certain categories are doing better than others. Like, one category, which is actually, you'll enjoy this, James. It's what do they call it? Dirty sodas. Have you heard of them yet over here?
Dirty soda. I don't think I have. Maybe I have, but it doesn't.
You're better off. It's the I was at a conference recently, and the only category every category was kind of stable, or some are down, obviously, but the only one that was up was this new concept of dirty sodas, which is in essence take like a soda, a Coca-Cola, and fill it with sweets, marshmallows, chocolate, candy.
Dirty soda. That sounds like an amazing soda. What are we talking about now?
Oh, well,
what are we doing?
It depends. It depends what perspective we look at it from. It's obviously the most incredibly unhealthy drink or thing you can think of, but it's a category that's new and that's blowing up.
That sounds like it must be a TikTok trend. It must be that some kids...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Some kids were putting Skittles in a soda and then it kind of blew up.
Yeah. So, just anyway, I was mind blown by that fact, as if this country didn't have enough health issues and stuff as it is. They're
putting RFK Jr. to work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But no, we're definitely seeing it begin to come back. Where we can see from our user base from a loyalty standpoint, I think I mentioned earlier, there is no person more loyal than a consumer with a food allergy when they have a good experience, because again, they've been burnt so many times, they've been given so much misinformation. When they go back, or when they find a place that caters to them and that they trust, repeat customer for life, or for the most part. And so we have a lot of data that kind of backs that up in our system. We can see repeat usage, we can see repeat customers going back to the same places. And I think it all just comes back to personalization, right? Like that's what we do to personalize. But generally across the industry, loyalty programs, finding other ways that, not just with allergies or whatever, but finding other ways to personalize the guest experience based on whatever data point you can find that allows you to do that is huge. And that's what's driving most growth on the marketing side, on the sales side, or whatever way you want to call it. So personalization is the name of the game. And it just so happens in our world it's personalized based on the foods that you can and can't eat.
100%. I mean, I know that that's a super important value among, I think it's Gen Z, like personalization for brands, or their the companies they follow. They're incredibly loyal to them if they show signs of personalization and getting their own experiences. Dylan, that's amazing. We're running out of time, I'm afraid, but I do have one last question for you, which is, I have two last questions for you, but this is my penultimate question. What advice would you give to founders who also made that jump from a more traditional background like yourself into the more fluid, ambiguous, scary startup life, but also one that requires some of these regulatory bumps along the way? I mean, it's a bumpy journey. So what advice would you give to someone who's maybe thinking of taking the leap that you took?
Yeah, so two things. One is I did spend several months while I was still in my last job, doing my homework, doing my research, doing consumer, talking to restaurants, talking to consumers. Like, I spent a lot of time while I was still a lawyer validating that I wasn't crazy, right? And that there was something here, and that there was a demand, and that there was something that could be done here. So I don't think I would never recommend someone say, oh, I have an idea, I'm going to quit my job tomorrow, and then investigate the idea. Like, definitely do your diligence and take a bit of time to validate your idea before you take the plunge, number one. Number two is, I think you have to be super passionate about that idea. If you're big into sports and you have a small idea about, I don't know, music, and you don't really like music, but you have an idea around it, I think it's so much harder to succeed, because there are so many bumps in the road. There are so many no's for every yes. There are so many pushbacks. There's so many people who think you're crazy and that this is a terrible idea. But it's 100 times harder than you think it will be. And so if you're not really passionate about it, and if you don't truly believe that what you're doing or building is needed in the world, I think it's very hard to be resilient enough to survive those inevitable downward swings, which will come every so often and are part of the journey. And then from on the regulatory side, honestly, when I started, I didn't think regulatory would be as big a component of this. It kind of fell
You're
into
like,
our lap.
I see.
Yes, yeah, no, 100%. Like I didn't see it coming initially until about 18 months ago, when I saw some of the kind of, I heard the murmurings that this might be happening in the US. And then as it started becoming a reality and I started getting involved, I was like, oh, like this, if we can get this over the line, this will be the domino that, again, makes us a required service for millions of restaurants. And that is a very different business to selling something that, while every restaurant, I believe, should have, is still optional. And it's a nice to have. And some restaurants just simply don't care about this community. And they're like, whatever, let them suffer. Whereas now we're seeing the start of, no, you can't serve food unless you do this. And so there's definitely, I think, James, luck comes into these things a lot. Like if we were doing what we did 5 years ago, we'd be 5 years away from this regulation coming in, and as a business, who knows where we would have got to by now. Like, timing and luck is huge. But you, again, unless you try, you'll never know. And so, as I know I was kind of sounded a bit negative there, but ultimately, if you are passionate about it, and if you do believe that you have that idea and you're the right person to do it, take the plunge. Absolutely go for it and give it your all, and you'll never regret it.
Well, I mean, that's, it's not the same scale, but that's what I'm doing with this show. You know, what started as a small Substack where I kind of ran out of characters on Twitter, so I needed to write a bit more, so I put it on Substack, and then I interviewed a friend of mine, and then I invested in some equipment, and then I made some logo. You know, and it grows, and you just got to keep the grit, and you got to keep and. Sometimes the microphone's going to break, or sometimes the recording's not going to work. But that's it. You got to ride with it. I understand it completely, and I love what you folks are doing. I did say I had one last question for you, so I will follow through on that. What is the best way for the viewers and readers and listeners watching this now? What's the best way for them to follow you, or keep in touch, or keep track of what you folks are doing? Let's hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. Dylan McDonnell on LinkedIn. You should be able to find me pretty easy. Name of the company is Foodini, Foodini. So LinkedIn is a good spot. And then our website, foodini.co, for anyone who, in particular in the food world, who wants to kind of check that out and just see a bit more, maybe visual examples of how it actually works. But yeah, always love talking to founders and investors and anyone in this space. So I would say anyone who resonated with anything that we talked about today, feel free to reach out on either one of those mediums, or my email is dylan@getfoodini.com, getfoodini.com.
Wonderful. I will do it. I'll put it underneath here, make it perfect for everyone to follow and check out.
Thank you.
Dylan, thank you so much for taking the time today. I look forward to flying over there one day, and either in Europe or America, and coming across your work. It's super important. Thank you very much.
And thank you for having me. I appreciate it a lot.